Before we dive in, quick interactive note for the YouTube listeners. If you enjoy humanity in space stories where apex predators kneel before men, make sure to smash that like button, drop a comment about your favorite moments so far, and hit subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Now let's get into the story. The Chamber of the Galactic Council was never meant for comfort. It was a monument to power, an arena of stone, steel, and light where thousands of alien dignitaries loomed on terraces shaped like thrones. The air shimmered with the hum of energy barriers, the scent of ozone sharp enough to sting. In the center, under white beams that made no shadow, a cage pulsed with blue-lit restraints. Inside that cage the predator stirred. It stood 4 meters tall, a wall of muscle and scars, its hide a mottled gray that caught the light like stone turned flesh. Its claws scraped the energy field, every strike sending ripples that made the walls tremble. When it breathed, the sound was like a furnace drawing air. Civilizations had recorded whole colonies burned and broken at the advance of its kind. They called it extinction incarnate, though none of the aliens dared speak the name aloud here. The counselors' voices rose in layered tongues, each one overlaying the other like clashing instruments in an orchestra. To them, this moment was historic. They had captured a predator alive, shackled it with barriers forged from their oldest technologies. The act was meant as proof that their empire was absolute, their authority unbreakable. Among them stood one figure who did not belong. Kale Draven was human, which already made him an oddity in this chamber. He wore the hardened fabric of a frontier scout, scarred armor plates patched with burn marks, his boots dulled by miles of dust. He was lean but carried himself like someone who knew where every exit lay and how to use it. A thin scar cut from his jaw to his temple, pale against his sun-darkened skin. His eyes, gray and calm, were the only thing steady in a hall full of fear. To the council, Kale was barely a guest, a representative of a species still too new to the stars to be taken seriously. Humanity's place was at the edge of the map, scrabbling in frontier worlds, tolerated but not respected. He should have been invisible among the glittering robes and jeweled crowns of galactic dynasts. And yet, as the predator's golden eyes scanned the chamber, they stopped on him. The beast ignored the alien soldiers posted along the walls with their rifles primed. It ignored the counselors bickering on their perches. Its gaze fixed on Kale, unblinking, intense. The air grew taut, as though the predator's attention alone pressed against every being present. Whispers stirred through the crowd. "Does it see prey?" one voice hissed. "Why does it not rage at us?" asked another. "Perhaps it marks him for its first kill." Kale didn't move. He held the predator's gaze with the stillness of a man accustomed to danger. Beneath the council's buzzing suspicion, he studied the beast with quiet recognition, though no one else saw it. The presiding counselor, a towering being draped in emerald silks, spread his arms to command silence. "Behold," he thundered, his voice magnified by hidden amplifiers. "What no empire has done, the council has achieved. The predator is bound, its fury caged. From this day forth, let no world fear what we command." Applause echoed, a forced, brittle noise that clattered like dropped metal. The predator responded by slamming its claws into the barrier. The energy field screamed and flared, forcing guards to scramble and adjust controls. Some counselors flinched back from their seats. Kale remained still, his eyes never leaving the beast. In the upper terraces, 2 diplomats whispered. "Why is the human here at all?" "Tokens," another replied. "The council displays inclusiveness. It will remind him of his people's insignificance." But the predator had not stopped staring at Kale. It tilted its massive head, shoulders rising and falling with each growl. The council mistook the gesture for hunger, their fear thickening into disgust. Kale finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "It's not looking at you." The words cut across the chamber like a blade. Murmurs rippled. Soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons. The presiding counselor turned, glaring down at the lone human. "You presume to speak in this hall?" Kale met the glare without hesitation. "I'm telling you the truth. If it wanted to tear you apart, it would. It's focused on me." The counselor's eyes narrowed, voice sharp. "Are you claiming some bond with this abomination?" Kale said nothing more. The predator's golden gaze flickered, as if catching a memory, and its growl softened into something deeper, something closer to recognition. The council dismissed the moment with laughter that didn't quite mask their unease. "Arrogance," the presiding one declared. "Humans see meaning where there is none. The predator sees only its next meal." Yet as the laughter swelled, the predator moved closer to the barrier, ignoring every alien voice, every taunt. Its stare burned only for Kale. The chamber's lights flared brighter, signaling the end of the ceremony. Soldiers prepared to escort the human out, his presence no longer required. The council had their spectacle, their symbol of control. But Kale didn't move when summoned. He lingered a moment longer, letting the silence hang between him and the beast. He didn't smile, didn't speak again, but in his stillness there was a promise unspoken. The predator lowered its massive head until its brow pressed the barrier. Sparks hissed across its skin, but it didn't flinch. Its golden eyes remained locked on Kale as the chamber filled with rising unease. The guards closed in, weapons humming, urging Kale toward the exit. And the predator growled, not at them, not at the council, but at the idea of being separated from him. The sound rolled through the chamber like thunder. For the first time that day, the council's confidence faltered. The ceremony ended in forced dignity, but unease lingered in the vaulted hall. Aliens muttered and argued, guards exchanged worried glances, and yet the only clarity was in the predator's gaze, fixed on the human scout who never looked away. When Kale finally turned to leave, the predator's roar followed him, echoing like a vow through the chamber of the galaxy's oldest rulers. And though the council tried to dismiss the unease with proclamations of victory, a seed had been planted, a question none dared voice aloud. Why had the deadliest predator in the universe chosen to look only at a human? The council had designed its restraints to hold monsters. Each band of energy was reinforced with ancient alloys, each pulse calibrated to nullify muscle contractions and block every nerve impulse required for violence. In their arrogance, the elder races had declared it flawless. The predator shattered that illusion in a single heartbeat. It began with a low, guttural snarl that rolled across the chamber like an avalanche. The energy field around its body flickered as though something within its sheer mass disrupted the resonance. Then it moved, one violent twist of its shoulders, and the barrier fractured with a shriek of tearing light. Chains that had been meant to withstand tectonic pressures snapped like brittle twine. The chamber exploded into chaos. Counselors screamed and bolted from their perches, silken robes flaring as guards rushed to cover their retreat. Energy rifles spat bolts of white heat that crackled across the predator's hide, leaving smoldering scars but no lasting harm. The beast answered with a roar so deep the walls seemed to quake. Its claws gouged furrows in the floor as it lunged, scattering soldiers like leaves in a storm. Kale did not run. While alien dignitaries fled and soldiers unleashed desperate fire, he stepped forward. His expression was steady, though his pulse hammered in his throat. He knew this chaos was more than fury, it was defiance. The predator had never been meant to kneel in chains, and now the council's illusion of dominance had collapsed. The beast swung its massive arm, catching a guard mid-strike and hurling him against a pillar with bone-shattering force. Its jaws snapped shut around another's rifle, biting the weapon clean in half. Yet through all the carnage, its eyes found Kale again. And Kale raised his voice, low but commanding. Stop. The word carried no technology, no psychic resonance, only human certainty. For a breathless moment, the predator froze. Its claws hovered inches from a soldier who had fallen to the floor, the terrified alien staring upward with certain death reflected in his eyes. Then the predator turned away, its head swiveling back toward Kale. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Soldiers faltered, unsure whether to continue firing or retreat. The predator lowered its victim to the ground with a disdainful shove and began to advance, not toward the panicked crowd but toward the lone human. Every step was a thunderclap. Smoke rose from the scorch marks on its flesh where plasma had struck, but the beast ignored the pain. Kale's hands remained at his sides. He remembered another time, another world, when those same eyes had burned with the same fury. It came back to him with startling clarity. The frontier moon of Vanar, a place where jungle swallowed settlements whole. Kale had been stranded after a slaver raid, his unit dead, his comms shattered. Bleeding from a wound in his side, he had stumbled into a clearing, and found the predator there, half buried under rubble from a collapsed canyon wall. Its leg had been trapped, broken, its body weakened from a hunter's ambush. Both man and beast had been close to death. He could have ended it then. A few shots and the predator's skull would have shattered. But something in its gaze, raw and unyielding even in pain, had mirrored his own. Instead, Kale had set aside his weapon. He had dragged himself closer, ignoring his instincts, and cut free the jagged stone pinning its body. In return, the predator had not torn him apart when it regained its strength. Instead, it had watched him stagger into the trees, and days later, it had followed. That was the memory alive now in its eyes. Not hunger. Recognition. Kale lifted a hand slowly, palm outward. The predator's steps slowed. Its breath came in deep, resonant huffs, chest rising like a bellows. The chamber's lights flickered in the wake of its energy. Counselors gawked in disbelief as the predator bowed its massive head, the tips of its claws dragging against the floor as though restraining its own violence. "You see it," Kale said quietly, his voice carrying in the hush that followed. "It isn't kneeling to power. It's remembering who I am." The council's presiding figure bellowed from a safe distance, his voice cracking with fear disguised as rage. "Seize the human. He has corrupted it, enslaved it. No predator bends willingly." Guards surged forward at the command, their weapons rising. The predator snarled, lowering its shoulders protectively in front of Kale. Its growl shook the air until dust rained from the high ceiling. The soldiers halted, caught between obedience and the certainty of their own deaths. Kale did not flinch. He laid his hand on the predator's head, fingers brushing coarse hide still hot from battle. The beast stilled under his touch, its breathing steadying, eyes never leaving his. The sight was more damning to the council than all the destruction that had come before. The presiding figure shrieked, voice trembling. "This proves it. Humanity conspires with extinction. Arrest him before he brings ruin on us all." But none moved. The predator's presence was a wall of death that held them where they stood. Even the most hardened guards knew that a single wrong move would see their blood on the floor. Kale spoke again, louder this time, his voice cutting through the chamber. "You thought you could cage what you don't understand. But respect isn't a chain, and survival isn't submission. You call it a monster because it won't bow to you. Maybe that's why it remembers me." The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was brittle, ready to shatter at the next breath. Some counselors whispered of executions, others of exile. Fear was a taste in the air, bitter and sharp. The predator exhaled, a sound like a storm receding, and slowly sank to one knee. Its head lowered, pressing against the floor at Kale's feet. The gesture struck like lightning. Every being in that hall had studied predator lore, and every record insisted the species had no word, no instinct, no gesture for submission. To see one kneel at all was beyond belief. To see it kneel to a human shattered everything the council thought immutable. Kale kept his hand steady against its skull, his eyes never leaving the council. He felt the beast's steady thrum beneath his palm, the raw furnace of its life force contained only by choice. The counselors could not disguise their terror now. They were not rulers witnessing a prisoner, they were relics staring at the future, and it was a man standing beside a predator that refused to kneel to anyone else. The presiding figure sank back into his seat, silks trembling as his voice fell to a whisper. "This cannot be." Kale did not answer. He let the silence stretch, the image searing itself into every watching eye. The predator knelt, the human stood tall, and the chamber of rulers held its breath as the impossible unfolded before them. The soldiers slowly lowered their rifles, unwilling to provoke a fate they could not control. The counselors whispered and argued in frantic tones, but none dared step forward. The truth had already taken root, and it could not be caged again. And in the quiet aftermath, Kale knew the game had changed. He had not just survived the council's display, he had turned it on its head. The predator had made its choice, and the galaxy would not forget. The chamber doors shuttered closed, locking the moment in history, but the echoes of the predator's kneeling rumble lingered like a storm waiting to break. The hall was a storm of voices, each one sharp, shrill, and desperate to reclaim the order that had slipped from their grasp. The predator knelt, unmoving, its head lowered in quiet acknowledgement at Kale's feet. No declaration from the council could erase the sight, no command could undo the truth of what every eye had witnessed. The galaxy's deadliest beast had bowed, not to the rulers of empires, but to a man they deemed insignificant. Counselors clutched their robes as if fabric could shield them from the weight of what they had seen. Some hissed accusations of trickery. Others whispered of sorcery, of forbidden human technology that must be purged before it spread. But beneath their fear lay something worse than rage, uncertainty. If the predator could kneel of its own will, the council's entire structure of fear and dominance was a hollow stage. Kale stood calm in the eye of their panic. His hand rested on the predator's skull, steady, unshaken by the chaos around him. He didn't speak, not yet. He let them watch. He let the silence deepen until their voices grew frantic with the need to fill it. The presiding counselor slammed his staff against the dais, the echo snapping through the chamber like a whip. His silks trembled with each breath. "This is deception," he declared. "No predator yields. The human has bound it with unholy means. Guards, seize him. Strip the beast of life before it corrupts us all." None of the guards moved. Their weapons hung limp at their sides. The predator's low rumble was a living warning, vibrating in their bones. One wrong step would end them. Kale's voice broke the stalemate, quiet but unyielding. It kneels because it chooses to. Remembers. It respects. That is not corruption and it is not sorcery. It's something you don't understand. The words struck like thrown stones, plain and unadorned, yet sharper than any weapon. Some counselors recoiled, others sneered. To admit that respect could tame what they had failed to dominate was to admit their centuries of fear were rooted in ignorance. A thin, scaled diplomat leaned forward, her tongue flickering nervously. If what he claims is true, then humanity holds sway over extinction itself. They are too dangerous. Their species must be confined, restricted before this spreads. The presiding figure seized upon it eagerly. Yes, humanity must not be allowed to rise. They are already defiant, unbound by our decrees. This proves they are a threat to the order we have bled to preserve. Kale's jaw tightened, though his tone remained even. You speak of order, but all I see is fear dressed as law. You built your power on cages, on the illusion that everything can be shackled. What happens when something chooses to bow without chains? The chamber erupted again. Cries of exile, of extermination, of testing filled the air. Others called for patience, for study, for harnessing what they had witnessed. The predator shifted restlessly under Kale's hand, growling when one counselor demanded its immediate execution. The sound silenced the chamber more effectively than any staff or gavel. Kale stepped forward, his presence forcing the council to confront him directly. You asked for proof of your strength. Instead you saw the limits of it. You can't decide what kneels and what doesn't. And if you can't accept that, then you've learned nothing from all the centuries you've claimed to rule. The presiding figure's eyes burned with loathing. You would lecture us, human? You would place yourself above empires that have stood since your kind was still crawling in mud. Kale didn't waver. I don't stand above you. But neither do I stand beneath you. And now neither does it. His hand pressed lightly against the predator's skull. The beast rumbled, not as a threat, but as agreement. The words rippled through the hall, leaving silence in their wake. Some leaned forward, unwillingly captivated. Others recoiled as though the human's calm defiance was more dangerous than any weapon. The council had expected panic, terror, pleas for mercy. Instead they found a man who spoke with the steadiness of survival, the quiet authority of someone who had stared down death and walked away. The presiding figure, cornered, sought another weapon. If what you say is true, if this beast truly honors you of its own will, then prove it. Let us test this bond under conditions that strip away your words. If you fail, humanity will be held accountable for the danger you bring into this hall. If you succeed, he spat the word like poison. Then we shall decide what fate to assign you. Kale's gaze didn't waver. You want a test? Then give it. But remember what you're asking. When you force strength to prove itself, you may not survive the answer. Gasps swept through the terraces at his audacity. Yet not one counselor could dismiss the truth of it. Their entire chamber still trembled with the memory of the predator's roar, with the knowledge that every soldier present had frozen rather than risk provoking it. The presiding figure slammed his staff again, signaling the decree. Then it is decided. The human and his beast will face judgment in trial. If the bond is true, let it be measured against trials no predator has ever passed. If it fails, let them be destroyed together. Kale gave a single nod, as if agreeing to nothing more than another march through wilderness. The predator rose at last from its kneel, towering, eyes blazing gold. Yet it moved not in anger but in solidarity, looming at Kale's side like a shadow given flesh. The chamber filled with clashing voices again, some calling for blood, others for patience, all of them unable to erase the sight of man and monster standing as one. Their noise meant nothing to Kale. The moment of choice had already come, and the path forward was clear. The predator bent its head slightly toward him, a gesture so subtle no alien understood its weight. But Kale remembered the clearing on Vaynar, the rubble, the moment when two creatures who should have been enemies instead chose recognition. That choice had followed him here. And now, in the heart of the galaxy's greatest hall, it was no longer just his secret. It was the galaxy's. The council declared the session closed, guards pouring in to corral the panic. But as Kale walked toward the exit with the predator pacing silently at his side, every eye tracked them, every whisper carried the same thought. If the council's trials could not break this bond, then nothing would. The arena was carved from stone older than most civilizations, its walls rising like cliffs around a pit drenched in artificial sunlight. Thousands of alien eyes watched from tiered balconies, their voices a low tide of expectation and bloodlust. The council had promised a spectacle, and the galaxy had gathered to witness whether the bond between a human and a predator was truth or trickery. Kale stood at the center of the pit with the beast at his side. The predator towered above him, muscles rippling under scarred hide, its golden gaze burning with a feral light that made the crowd lean back from their seats. Yet where the audience saw terror, Kale saw familiarity. Every line of its body, every flick of its claws, spoke in a language he had come to understand on the frontiers. The predator was not restless. It was ready. The gates on the far side of the pit groaned open. Chains rattled and the first of the council's creations emerged. It was a hulking war beast, its skin plated with metallic scales, saliva hissing where it struck the floor. Its eyes glowed with chemical fire, and rows of spines rattled along its back. The crowd howled their approval, their hunger for blood echoing in the chamber. Kale's voice was calm, a thread of steel. "Stay close." The predator's growl answered, deep and resonant, a promise as much as a sound. The warbeast charged. Its bulk thundered across the pit, claws tearing furrows in the stone. Soldiers in the upper tiers leaned forward, eager to see the predator crushed beneath engineered strength. But at the last instant Kale moved. He shouted a sharp command and the predator leapt sideways, fluid as a shadow. The warbeast plowed into empty air, its momentum carrying it past them in a roar of frustration. Kale had already spotted what the council had overlooked. The creature's armored scales flexed at the shoulders when it turned. Vulnerable. He raised his voice again, a single word, and the predator obeyed with a speed that left the crowd gasping. It slammed into the beast's flank, claws sinking between plates, jaws locking onto the exposed joint. Blood and sparks erupted as the warbeast screamed. Kale darted forward, drawing the short blade he had been allowed, and drove it into the same wound. Together, man and monster tore the warbeast down in a storm of violence. The corpse hit the ground with a weight that shook the arena. The crowd erupted in conflicting cries, some in awe, others in denial. But the council was not finished. Another gate opened. This time it was not one beast but a swarm. Drones, sleek and metallic, poured into the pit like a river of blades. They moved as one, darting in perfect formation, each tipped with plasma cutters that gleamed with deadly light. The predator roared and swiped, shattering several in an instant, but the swarm wheeled with mechanical precision, surrounding them. Kale's mind worked faster than panic. He spotted the control nexus glimmering faintly on the backs of the drones. He shouted again, his tone sharp, and the predator shielded him with its body as he aimed for weaknesses. Every time it struck, he moved with it, guiding its fury into precision. The swarm tightened, cutters slicing against hide and armor, but Kale ducked beneath the predator's sweeping limbs, using its cover to fire into the nexus with scavenged rifles from fallen drones. Sparks burst. The swarm faltered, their precision stuttering into chaos. The predator seized the opening. It launched upward, smashing through the center of the drone cloud, claws tearing circuits and wires, jaws clamping down on metal with the same ferocity it had shown flesh. Drones crashed to the ground in smoking heaps. Kale cut through the stragglers with calculated strikes, his movements efficient, never wasteful. When the last drone collapsed in pieces, the crowd erupted again, this time less in celebration than in disbelief. The council's champions had been defeated, and yet the human and the predator stood bloodied but unbroken. The presiding counselor rose, his voice carrying over the tumult. The final trial begins. The ground trembled as the last gate opened. The creature that emerged was a nightmare stitched from the council's worst fears. Twice the predator's size, its frame bristled with spines and armored plates. 4 arms ended in hooked talons, and its mouth gaped wide enough to swallow a man whole. Its roar shook dust from the rafters. This was no test of loyalty. It was an execution disguised as trial. Kale's breath steadied. He glanced at the predator, and in its gaze he saw no fear, only trust. The giant lunged, its talons gouging stone where they had stood a heartbeat earlier. Kale barked a command, and the predator launched forward, colliding with the monster in a clash that split the air. The ground shook beneath their struggle, claws against claws, teeth against armor. Kale sprinted along the edge, scanning for weaknesses. He saw one, vents along its spine where heat shimmered from its body. "Spine," he shouted. The predator responded instantly, slamming its weight upward, climbing the creature's body with a ferocity that left the crowd breathless. It drove its claws into the vents, ripping into flesh beneath armor. The beast howled, thrashing, trying to dislodge its attacker. Kale sprinted closer, using debris to launch himself up the monster's back. He landed near the vents, blade flashing. Sparks and blood mingled as he struck again and again. The creature bucked violently. Kale lost his footing and fell, the ground rushing up like stone death. The predator released its grip to dive after him, catching his body mid-air, shielding him as they crashed into the dust. The monster towered above them, wounded but enraged, ready to crush them both in a single blow. Kale staggered to his feet, his body screaming in pain but his mind clear. He locked eyes with the predator. No words were needed now. He moved left, it moved right. Together, they struck in perfect synchrony, Kale driving his blade deep into the exposed joint while the predator clamped its jaws on the monster's throat. They held as it thrashed, held as it roared, until at last the beast collapsed under its own weight. Silence swept the arena. Then, like a wave breaking, the crowd erupted in disbelief, awe, and fear. The council's deadliest trial had ended not in human blood, but in victory. The predator released its grip and turned to Kale. Its hide was torn, its breath ragged, yet it lowered its head in the same gesture that had silenced the council chamber before. Kale placed his hand against its skull, and together they stood in the center of the pit, bathed in light and shadow, defying every law the galaxy thought immutable. The presiding counselor's face was pale with fury. He raised his staff, his voice unsteady. This proves nothing. They survive only by trickery and luck. The council will not be ruled by spectacles. But his words rang hollow. The image of man and predator standing together, unbroken after trials that should have killed them both, had already etched itself into the memory of all who watched. Kale did not speak further. He let the silence work, let the truth sink deep into every mind. He knew what came next would not be trial but politics, and politics could be deadlier than beasts. As the predator's growl rumbled low and steady beside him, Kale lifted his eyes to the council terrace. The fight was over, but the war of what it meant had only begun. The chamber where the council reconvened was carved into the bedrock of the citadel, its vaulted ceiling studded with crystals that caught the torchlight and scattered it across polished obsidian floors. The air was taut with expectation, the silence as sharp as a drawn blade. The arena trials had ended, but the true confrontation was only now beginning. Every counselor knew the spectacle they had orchestrated had turned against them, yet pride and politics forbade them from admitting it outright. Kale stood in the center once more, flanked not by guards but by the predator, whose hide still bore the fresh marks of battle. The beast loomed in quiet defiance, golden eyes tracking every movement in the chamber, its breathing deep and deliberate, like the slow churn of distant thunder. Around them, ambassadors, generals, and witnesses from across the galaxy filled the terraces, their gazes riveted on the strange, unbreakable bond between human and predator. The presiding counselor rose, his robes a cascade of authority, though his face betrayed the strain beneath it. "You defied extinction," he said, his voice carefully measured. "But defiance does not equal legitimacy. We cannot let myth and spectacle dictate our laws." Kale's reply was calm, but there was steel under every word. "You wanted a demonstration of control. You wanted proof that what stands beside me can be commanded, not just feared. You've seen it. And you've seen that command is not born of chains or chemicals, but trust." A murmur spread through the chamber. Trust was not a word the council favored. They built empires on submission, on the breaking of wills. One of the elder counselors leaned forward, her voice brittle. "You are dangerous, human. Not because you survived but because you redefined survival. A predator cannot be trusted, only mastered. Yet it bows to you." Kale looked to the predator. It met his gaze with an intensity that made the chamber feel smaller. He spoke without looking back to the council. "It doesn't bow. It chooses." The words rippled like a shockwave. Even those hardened by centuries of power shifted uneasily. To accept that choice was possible was to admit that strength could not always be owned. The presiding counselor slammed his staff against the floor, the sound echoing like thunder. "Then let us test this choice once more. Not in combat but in loyalty." He turned to the guards at the periphery. "Strike the human down. Let us see if the predator protects him, or if instinct drives it to flee." The order cracked across the chamber like lightning. Dozens of armored guards moved at once, weapons drawn. The predator's growl rumbled, deep and feral, vibrating through stone and marrow alike. Kale did not flinch. He stepped forward, exposing himself to the circle of blades. His voice carried above the rising chaos. "You'll have your answer. But understand, if you spill my blood here, you don't just test loyalty. You prove to every world watching that the council fears what it cannot control." The guards hesitated. Fear battled with duty in their eyes. Before any decision could settle, the first strike came, not from the guards but from above. A figure cloaked in shadow dropped from the high balcony, a blade shimmering with venom. The assassin's aim was precise, meant for Kale's heart. The predator moved faster than thought. With a roar that shook the chamber, it intercepted the strike mid-fall, jaws snapping around the assassin's arm. Bone crunched. The weapon clattered harmlessly to the floor. The predator hurled the would-be killer across the chamber, where he landed in a heap at the council's feet. The audience erupted in pandemonium. Some shouted treachery, others demanded order, but all had seen what mattered most. The predator had not fled. It had shielded the human with a ferocity no command could summon. Kale's voice cut through the uproar, sharp and clear. There's your answer. Loyalty is not enforced. It is earned. And you cannot kill what you don't understand without proving your weakness to the galaxy. The presiding counselor's face twisted with fury. He pointed at Kale, his voice rising into a snarl. Enough. This human will not dictate the future of our order. Seize him. But the predator stepped forward, claws raking sparks from the stone, its body a wall of defiance. The guards faltered. None dared advance. The assassin groaned where he had fallen, his mask torn away to reveal the sigil of a rival faction. Whispers spread like wildfire. This attempt was no sanctioned test, but a desperate ploy to erase a truth already too visible. Kale seized the moment. He raised his voice not just to the council but to the witnesses, the ambassadors who would carry tales back to their worlds. You saw the trial. You saw the choice. And now you see the council's fear. They would rather bury truth under treachery than accept that a predator, the deadliest force you know, can choose alliance with humanity. What does that say about their rule? About the fragility of their power? The chamber trembled with voices. What had begun as a spectacle had transformed into revelation. For the first time in living memory, the council's authority was questioned aloud. The presiding counselor struck his staff again, but the sound was lost under the rising storm of dissent. He bellowed for silence, for loyalty, but every word sounded weaker than the last. Kale turned, meeting the predator's golden eyes. In that gaze was everything: the shared battles, the unspoken bond, the understanding that had turned survival into trust. He placed his hand against its scarred hide, feeling its breath steady beneath his palm. Together they stood, not master and beast but allies. The decision was no longer the council's to make. It was already made in the hearts of those who had watched. The predator lifted its head and released a roar that shook the chamber to its foundations. It was not the roar of conquest nor of hunger. It was a declaration raw and undeniable. It had chosen. And in that choice the galaxy changed. Kale looked out over the chaos, his expression steady, his voice carrying one final truth into the heart of the chamber. You wanted proof of control. What you got was proof of freedom. And there's no cage strong enough to hold that. The council's order fractured under the weight of silence that followed, the kind of silence that marks an ending, and the birth of something greater.